Okay, so tonight we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 16, and tonight we're going to be doing verses 17 through to and including verse 21, which will take us to the end of chapter 16. I can't believe how far we've got, actually. It's amazing. So I shall read that out to you from verse 17 through to the end of chapter 16. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were voices and thunders and lightnings. And there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake, and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came into remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great. Okay, so throughout Revelation, I have emphasised from the very beginning, a lot of this language is symbolic. And sometimes I think that sounds like a bit of a cop-out. It's sort of saying, well, it's all symbolic, it's just all symbolic. And people don't really like that, because they feel, well, you're not really dealing with what, they want to know, well, what does it mean, But even like in today's society, we use symbolism more than you might think. So, for example, like with your phone, you just kind of look on the screen at the front, and there's usually lots of symbols there, and each symbol means this and it means that. So we do use symbols quite a lot in our own culture, in science, in sort of high-tech environments. And Revelation is very much an environment where the language is symbolic, it's prophetic, and it's the language of a vision. So we have to get used to that idea that there are symbols here that represent other things. Having said that, sometimes we can just get so caught up with the symbolism that we're like, okay, so here's a symbol. What does it represent? And you can become so caught up in that you actually miss the teaching, let's call it the lesson, right? And so in a way, best of all would be to have the symbolism correct and the lesson that you're learning correct. But it's probably better to have the symbolism slightly incorrect, but the lesson correct, It's like, in other words, if you understand what God is trying to teach you, that's more important. Whereas if you understand all the symbolism and then you kind of move on and you haven't asked yourself the question, so what is God actually trying to teach Christians here? Then that, I think, is the big error of the book of Revelation. It's like, what is God teaching us? So again, this is why I say, if I'm not sure, I'm not going to make something up or throw out a load of, well, it could be this or it could be that, or So I might throw something out if it's a bit interesting, but on the whole, I try and just say what I believe I can understand from the text. And most of all, it's the teaching. It's like, what is God trying to teach through this passage that I think will make Revelation accessible to you and to me. So, verse 18 it says that, verse 17, the seventh angel pours out his vial or his bowl into the air. And then we read there's this great voice out of the temple of heaven. And then verse 18, there are more voices, there's thunder, there's lightning, and there's a great earthquake. And we've had all these images before in the book of Revelation. Some of them might sound familiar to you. And all of these things here in Revelation and elsewhere in the Bible are associated with God's judgment. God's judgment. And I believe also we can see here history itself being replayed symbolically. So like last week I spoke about how when we talked about Armageddon, do you remember that, in the valley of Megiddo, and I said, well, it's mentioned in the book of Judges as being the place where all these battles take place with the Midianites and the Amalekites, and that is used as a symbol for conflict between the Muslims and the Crusaders. It's like they're in the valley of Megiddo. You know, it's geographically it's right, but it's more about saying, you know, this is where all these conflicts, all these battles take place. It's going to be a big battle, is what it's saying. And I believe something similar is happening here too. Because in verse 19 it says, and the great city was divided into three parts. And I believe that the great city here is Jerusalem. And if we look back to the siege of Jerusalem by the Romans in about 70 AD, the city, I'm not sure exactly what point, but at some point became divided into three political powers. And if you want the info, it was a guy called John of Giscala, Simon bar Giora, and Eleazar ben Simon. So these are actual people, you know, obviously real people. And the city of Jerusalem was divided into three parts. So it could be sort of recalling the fact that there was this great judgment that happened by God, and there was this great attack by the Roman army back in the day. And it's saying, you know, there's going to be a great division of Jerusalem, you know, also at this time, dividing it up. So this and we have this sort of the seventh trumpet blowing, and all this information comes out, but it may just be simply using imagery of God's past judgments and using them to sort of say, this is a really big judgment. This is something, you know, that God is going to bring here. So Babylon is mentioned. Again, Babylon is spoken of a lot in the Bible, and sometimes it is spoken of literally, and sometimes it is spoken of more symbolically. So let's have a look at verse 19. I'll just remind you of what it says. And the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God. And what that means is that God hadn't yet judged this Babylon. It's like when it says it came to remembrance before God, it's like God is now going to visit upon it great judgment. To give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So if you remember back to when we did Revelation 14 verse 8, it said, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So here we've got sort of similar language. Instead of the wine of fornication, here it's the wine of the fierceness of God's wrath. And this is a common symbol. We did a little bit of it when I did the symbolism of the cup. Remember that series of sermons? This idea of God is giving you this cup that you are going to drink down, or here Babylon is giving this cup of fornication, of it was actually unfaithfulness to God, not unfaithfulness to a husband or wife, and sort of giving it to the nations to drink, to share in her sins. And now God is saying, right, well, I'm going to give you a different cup. This is the cup of my wrath, and you're going to drink this. You're going to partake of God's judgments. And if you recall our study on Revelation 14, I said that the oppression and the persecution of the ancient Jewish people by Babylon is comparable to the oppression and persecution of genuine Christians by the Church of Rome. And that was the sort of connection that I drew. And that's why I believe that Babylon in this case, and we'll really see it when we get to chapter 17, it will all become incredibly clear. But I believe this is referring to the Church of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. So those who seduced the nations into spiritual adultery, those, if you like, who were sharing that cup of the wine of fornication, now they must drink of her cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So I'm going to come back to that again in a minute, just to clarify. So in verse 19 we have the seventh angel pouring out the wrath of God. And just incidentally, how many times has the book of Revelation spoken about the wrath of God? I mean, this is the New Testament, and yet it's all about the wrath of God, the punishment of the wicked, sin, the judgment of God, the plagues of God. We've just had it again and again, haven't we? And I think that, Christians who think the New Testament is just all about grace and love and kindness, yes, it is about those things, but I would say they haven't read the book of Revelation, and they probably haven't read generally in the New Testament, because there are lots of places in the New Testament where the apostles talk about the wrath of God, the judgment of God, and even Jesus himself talks about it. So let's have a look at one place where that happens. Luke chapter 6. Luke 6. So verse 23, Jesus says, "Rejoice, ye in that day leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in like manner did their fathers unto the prophets." He's talking about Christians being persecuted, just like the prophets were. But he's saying, in that day when I return, when your salvation is complete, when you're going to be taken up with me to live with me forever, rejoice in that day. And rejoice when you're persecuted. But in verse 24 he says, "But woe unto you that are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe unto you that are full, for you shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe unto you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets." So, and there are many other occasions where Jesus uses this phrase, woe unto you. He uses it with the Pharisees. He says, woe unto you, hypocrites. So, and even whole regions, woe unto you, Chorazin, because they rejected the message of the gospel. So this idea of the judgment of God is throughout the Bible. It's not just in the Old Testament. It wasn't like God was really angry in the Old Testament, then Jesus came along and then everything was fine. That's a very simplistic reading of what the Bible teaches. And we've seen here in Revelation time and time again that certainly whilst God is bringing salvation on those who are faithful to him, on those who are not, he is going to bring about this destruction, this punishment, the fierceness of his wrath. Now, there's an important lesson here, I think, to learn about deception and how God regards deception. And let's illustrate it with a well-known Bible verse. You can turn to it if you want. I'm just going to read out a section of it. So in Matthew 15, verse 14, Jesus explains how people should respond to false teachers. He says, let them alone. You could even leave it there. It's like, let them alone. Leave them alone. If they're false teachers, Get away from them. Don't sit and listen to them. Leave them, let them alone. They be blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. So ignore them, because if you follow them, you will not only fall under the same deception, but God will treat the followers of deceivers in the same way that he will treat those deceivers themselves. They both end up in the ditch or in the pit even, you know. Yeah. And again, we find in where is it, verse, well, we'll come to that in a minute. So this is an important lesson. It's like, you know, God is going to judge Babylon because of the wine of her fornication. He's going to give to her a cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. But it says not just that the great city Jerusalem fell, but the cities of the nations fell. It's like those that Babylon, Rome, Church of Rome, corrupted. The corruptors, the deceivers, they're going to fall, but all the nations who allow themselves to be deceived are also going to fall. They're also going to come and suffer this this judgment of God. So yes, let's look at verse 20. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. This is another reason, I think, for interpreting this as symbolism. It simply represents that there will be great and terrible judgments, and if you like, every familiar thing removed out of its place. You wouldn't expect that. You wouldn't expect, you know, islands to flee away, or mountains not found, because these are kind of permanent things, aren't they? These are things like you expect it to be there. You know, you don't wake up, if you live in Switzerland, is it, and you look out every day on the Matterhorn, you don't expect to open your shutters and suddenly it's not there. And I think this is the kind of language that's being used here. Everything that is familiar, everything that you thought was going to always be there, when the judgment of God comes, it will go. It will be overturned. So great will be the judgment. And in verse 21, we have this language about this great hail coming out of heaven. It says, and there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. So I was kind of looking at this, you know, what does a talent weigh? There's a few differences of opinion on it. What I read, it was somewhere between 55 and 100 pounds. So what's that in kilos? Is it double or half? I always get confused.
Half, isn't it? 2.2 pounds is a kilo.
Right. Oh, okay.
So it'll be about, it'll be about, what, 40 odd kilos?
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, that's a big hailstone.
Something like that, I think.
Dropping from that height. So, but again, I think it's symbolic. It's a back reference to the plagues of Egypt. You know, one of the plagues of Egypt was hail mixed with fire. So again, this sort of sounds like this is the judgment of God, very similar to what we have in the plagues of Egypt in the book of Exodus. But there's another place also where we've got it in Joshua. Let's have a look at that, Joshua 10. It's just worth connecting these passages. Okay. Joshua 10, verse 6. It says, and the men of Gibeon sent unto Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, saying, slack not thy hand from thy servants, come up to us quickly and save us, and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that dwell in the mountain are gathered together against us. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valour. And the Lord said unto Joshua, Fear them not, for I have delivered them into thine hand. There shall not a man of them stand before thee. Suddenly, therefore, came unto them suddenly, therefore came unto them suddenly, and went up from Gilgal all night. And the Lord discomfited them before Israel, and slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them along the way that goeth to Beth-horon, and smote them to Azekah unto Makkedah. And then it says, And it came to pass as they fled before Israel, and were in going down to Beth-horon, that the Lord cast down great stones, or hailstones, from heaven upon them unto Azekah, and they died. And they were more that died with hailstones than they whom the children of Israel slew with the sword. So it's this idea of God's pursuing with hailstones. It's like the judgment of God. God is fighting for Israel. And I think it's this idea here. God is defending his church. He is taking vengeance on those who are trying to corrupt his church. And this is the vengeance, and a lot of what we've read is concerned with God taking vengeance, isn't it? Like, do you remember the martyrs under the throne saying, How long, Lord, till you recompense us? How long till you take this vengeance? And God's not saying, Oh no, just forgive them, leave it. He's saying, no, there will be a time of vengeance for that. And so that's what we have. That's what we have here, I believe, is just these back references to times where God has judged. Back references where, God's saying, yes, I will. There will come a time of judgment. Now, at the moment, we're in a time of grace. Praise God. And, if you're an enemy of God, like today, if you're a Muslim or you're a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness or an atheist, you can come to God through the Lord Jesus Christ and ask for forgiveness, and you can become a Christian. But he's saying, there are times where God says, right, it's judgment time now. And those who have deceived, and even those who are allowing themselves to be deceived, may come under the judgment of God. There's always that kind of element of get right with God today, because we don't know what tomorrow holds,